Better sit up straight.
The Moravian Star is typically available out during Advent, so it is looking forward to, and so it's been rerouted to looking forward to the end of COVID.
Thank you. Thank you.
Morning, Bill and Gwinnett. Excuse me. Y'all got very quiet.
They did. Are you like this every Sunday? I get scared.
Oh, no. No.
Good morning.
Morning. Welcome, everyone. Or I guess you're welcoming me.
Morning.
Morning.
It's a two-way street.
I think that's correct.
Well, what are we waiting for?
I don't know.
Well, it's not 9:45 yet.
Oh, okay.
And
So we'll just wait a minute.
I'm jealous of the time. As I've already asked John Ryan to interrupt me if I get going on a railroad track. So I invite you to interrupt me if I get going. And you want to say something. Oh, there's Lib McGregor Simmons. Hi, Lib. She can't hear me yet, I don't think, though.
There, she's on now.
Yes, Lib and I know each other from Columbia Seminary Campbell Scholars study. She came as a Campbell Scholar, and I was in that program. Hi, Lib. And we were studying the mission of the church in a world of hunger. And so that's how I know Lib. Hi, Lib. Haven't seen you in a long time. I know this is your former congregation, so we shouldn't make too big a deal out of you, but we're glad to see you.
I'm delighted to be here. And that was 19 years ago.
Oh, my goodness.
Morning, Lib.
Welcome,
Good
Lib.
morning, everybody.
Lib, you look like you're at work.
Join you.
Liv, are you at Mount Pleasant this morning?
I am. I just got here.
Well, it is 9:45, and we don't want to cheat you anytime with
Thank you.
Kathleen O'Connor. Charlie and Rosemary Rannell are going to be introducing them, but they are driving back from Raleigh, so they have a video introduction we did. So we're going to go ahead and play that now.
Except we can't hear it.
No audio on it.
William, is there sound?
no.
That's good enough. Let's get rid of them and get started.
You froze.
My dear friends.
So the sound wasn't going through there?
Nope.
No.
Did you do the share sound, William?
Where is that?
Here, I got it. Give me 2 seconds. I'll pull it up.
Hi, Jeannie DeBose.
Hello. Hello, everyone.
I am so excited that Kathleen O'Connor is going to be teaching this class for the month of January. Kathleen is a very dear friend of ours, and we are in contact with her every week. We look forward to the time that she'll be able to actually come to Davidson and visit with us. So it's wonderful that she will be in this class.
It's a privilege for me to join Rosemary in welcoming Kathleen O'Connor to this class. She was a wonderful colleague at Columbia Seminary when we were there. He is the Emerita Professor of William McFeeters Professor of Old Testament at Columbia Theological Seminary. She has just completed, in her retirement, we should say, a 2-volume commentary on the first book of the Bible, Genesis. He interprets Genesis not only for the scholarly community, but for people like you and me, saying that it is for the people of God survival literature intended to be, or at least able to be read by them for troubled, suffering, in times of division, maybe like we are experiencing today as it was long ago, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. We welcome Kathleen and are fortunate to have her among us.
Thank you, Rosemary and Charlie. How lovely.
All right.
Okay, John is now in his mask, so we don't.
I've got to go run and get some copies off the copier.
Okay, that's great. That's great. Shall I just start, John? Is that okay with you?
Yes, ma'am. You're in charge.
Okay, yes, and I do. He's going to get the copy somewhere, so I'm asking you all to please interrupt me if I'm talking too fast, if you don't know what I'm talking about, or any other reason you have a comment to make. Because after writing a 2-volume commentary, I really have too much to say. So my challenge is trying to find ways into things. And so I have prepared a PowerPoint more to keep me on track than any other thing, but I hope it helps you also. And I'm honored to be with you. I've already mentioned that Davidson College Presbyterian Church has a wonderful reputation at Columbia Seminary, and we've had many students from among you. So that tells me you are a living, breathing, thriving church community. So onward, here we go. Here comes my PowerPoint. I'm going to try to remember to go back and forth here. I call the God of Genesis the God of the impossible. And I have in the corner a painting by Caravaggio, who was painting in the 1500s and is known for an artistic style called chiaroscuro. Maybe some of you are art interpreters and know about this. But notice the way the light goes from the top of Abraham's head into the angel's face, down to his hand, the amazing, miraculous ram. And then the son, Isaac, is here under the hand in the shadow. And he's the one who's looking at the ram or the angel, not clear. It's an interpretation of the text. It's the moment of the miracle. Now, I'm going to go over to here. I'll leave this in a few minutes, but I use trauma and disaster studies to read this book that's a book about new life. It's a book about origins and creation. And people would say, what? Trauma? Disaster? Well, okay, I'm going to put this aside for a minute. There I am again, and there you are. I want to talk about the historical period out of which almost all biblical scholars, critical scholars anyway, think that this book was written or composed for. And that period is not the beginning of time with a narrative about the exact way creation happened and the nation built. That time is the period after the Babylonian invasions of Judah and Jerusalem. I got going on trauma disaster studies because a man named Daniel Smith Christopher, an Old Testament scholar, was writing about the fact that biblical scholars seem to diminish the suffering of that period of Babylonian invasions and exile and displacement and destruction, that they kind of treated it like it was just nothing. But in fact, historians and archaeologists will now will acknowledge that this is a period of massive destruction. And after 3 invasions, after carting people around the desert to Babylon for captivity, the leaders, the readers, the people who worked for the government, the people who were royalty, the people who owned property, and the priests, of course, are transported out of the country. And the people in the country are displaced and pushed everywhere. They can't stay in Jerusalem anymore. Now, those are historical facts. And for me, they matter because using trauma and disaster lens, I see what happens to believers in the face of trauma and disaster. Everything that supported their understanding of life, their relationship with God, their relationship to their community collapses. And they're confronting a world of chaos. How could you trust the God who promised to live on Mount Zion in the temple forever, and that temple is now burned to the ground? How can you trust a God who said you're the chosen people, and yet you're now scattered and under the control of an invading empire? How can you trust God who says that you are the special, the beloved, and yet this has happened to you? So the impact of the invasions is to destroy the supports of life. Now, I go over and I ask some questions. Where do they go? This is going to be awkward for me, but if it bothers you, tell me. I'm completely without ego in regard to this. Okay. So the question is, will the community survive? Because the Northern Kingdom, this is more history than you may want to know, but the Northern Kingdom of Israel, later the Samaritans, that Northern Kingdom was invaded 150 years earlier by Assyria and virtually disappeared. Just a little remnant remained of them. And the anticipation of such a community that has seen that happen to their sister nation is that it's going to happen to them. And I think it is to this that the book of Genesis and other biblical books is speaking. Okay, now, that's not what I want. This is what I want. What do people who, you may know this in your own life, you may know this from friends, you may know this from our culture. What do people need to survive after trauma or disaster, particularly collective trauma, a tornado running through your town, a flood that destroys you, a war? What do you need? And so I'm going to just go back to you now because I'd rather look at you than this. What people require are several things. The first is that they require seeing what happened to them. They need some way to re-enter the experiences of catastrophe. They need to be able to see it because trauma destroys your memories even as it implants itself in your head. And it gets repeated and repeated and repeated. And so we can imagine this destroyed society, all displaced people, we can imagine them trying to figure out how to go about daily life, even as they're re-triggering the invasion, the death, the loss, and the movement. So they need some way to have what's happened to them be mirrored or seen. They need to be seen in this. But if they go into a story that's a historical description of exactly what happened to them, they will be re-triggered, or their children will be re-triggered into the catastrophe. So I can point to the Holocaust and suggest that there were surviving Jewish survivors of the Holocaust who would say, after the Holocaust, there can be no poetry. We can't talk about this. It's beyond language. And yet, in the how many years since then, the 60 years since then, what has there been? Nothing but efforts to represent the Holocaust, to understand it, and to understand what happened and why. So, simplifying a lot of stuff, I want to make the claim that survivors of the Babylonian invasion need to see their story, but not head on. They need to see it indirectly, as if it were happening to someone else on a stage, or we would say on a screen, or in a piece of literature, or many pieces of literature. So they need to see it and understand it. They also need to interpret why it happened. Now, just think of somebody whose house is burned down. How did that happen? How did this possibly happen? Did we leave the stove on? Oh, did I not pay the gas bill and then something happened and it exploded? People require interpretation. And I guess because we're interpreting beings, we find explanations. And we need explanations in order to go forward. Because if we don't have a why, we are subjected to mental, spiritual, and physical chaos. And that's implanted in people. So I'm right now quickly and very simplistically offering some theory about how I read Genesis. And I didn't just get this idea about Genesis. I got it first about the book of Jeremiah. And after doing Jeremiah, which is trauma upon fire and brimstone, it's all over the place. Ezekiel also, Lamentations also. I got working on Genesis. And when I started reading Genesis, I thought, well, I'm just going to talk about immigration here, because every single major character is an alien, a refugee, an immigrant, a displaced person, every major character. And I thought, well, I'll just do that in light of our immigration crisis around the globe. And then I got to the story of the flood, and I suddenly said, oh my God, this is a disaster narrative. It's an account of the destruction of everything. And Noah and his family are about to be obliterated. The whole earth is obliterated, as if an invading army had come through, say I. And that then opened my eyes, so to speak, to the rest of the book. And I began to see Genesis as a continuation of the work of the earlier prophetic literature to help a people who are facing the abyss have a future. And now the text, I hope that you had a chance to look at, the text for today, Genesis 22, that text, I say, is an accounting of the end of the nation, almost, told through the lens of the famous father and son and founders of Israel. It's a story of catastrophe that comes from the very ancient past and is now brought into the present moment in a symbolic fashion. So you might begin to see how all those theological and psychological problems recede for me as I read this. So if you're with me, maybe I should pause right here and see if there's a response from anybody, a question, comment, or are you crazy kind of remark. Ginger, did I see you move?
Yeah. When you're doing your PowerPoint, are we supposed to see that picture?
Oh, yeah, you are.
Because I'm not. Is anybody else not? Nobody's seeing it.
What are you seeing? Are you seeing me?
We're just seeing what we do right now.
You're seeing me gesturing all over the screen.
Oh, well, that's great. I love your gestures.
Thank
but we're
you.
not, that when you describe that picture, you know.
Okay,
Kathleen, do you want William to bring that up?
I want William to do it because I'm just going to sort of treat it as please, William, I need you. Are you there?
I am here.
Thank you, William.
Is it on one of these emails or?
It's a PowerPoint that I sent to John 3 or 4 days ago.
I forwarded it to you last week.
Let's see.
Wonder why I can't just do it. Did you hit share screen for me?
Let me download this.
Well, why don't we just blame John if he leaves the room, and then when he comes back,
just keep going.
Okay. Yeah, let me get this PowerPoint to pull up.
Okay. And if you don't, we'll just move on. This is the way it always rolls, a little problem here or there.
All right, which slide number?
If you just put the whole thing up, look at the first one, and they can see the picture.
All right.
It's the title page.
Let me go ahead and hit share, then I can go full screen.
Oh, perfect. All right. Okay. So here we go. This is a Caravaggio painting. The head, just follow the light around. You can really start over here with the hand that's about to execute. You go over to here, you go down to here, you see the ram, you see the knife, you see the child's leg, you see his shoulders, but he's in the dark. And he's looking here, or is he looking here? It's hard to tell. But it is an interpretation of the moment of the miracle when the ram shows up in the book. Now, can we move down, William, to the next one quickly? Yeah, so here's my description of the mess, the exiles, then Persia destroys Babylon, and the exiles return. And then, William, next one, please. So I think of Genesis as a book, as Charlie said, a book of survival, of healing and hope, because it's filled with disaster narratives. Let's go on to the next one, finally, William. Okay, here's my question about the book, and it really is a question. I don't know if other scholars are going to support my way of thinking about this book, but what if the story is a symbolic account of the nation's end, near end, and its survival? And the reason, one of the confirming thoughts for me is that the story of all the major Judean characters are stories of survival. They all come to the edge of destruction. And then there is some intervention, some way God remembers them, some new thing. For example, even Sodom and Gomorrah, you have that happening where we're not in the Jewish community. Oh, yes, we are. Excuse me. Even in Sodom and Gomorrah, you have God intervening at the moment. So I'm trying to suggest that this story is a story that boils down the collective experience into a family narrative with its pathos and focused terror. And it's a survival strategy. Okay, and I will say more about that. It offers the audience a glimpse of their national disaster from a narrative and historical distance. It happened in the past. Though its survivors can see their past through it, the survivors can see their past and come to terms with it. And here's the key. Give it a narrative form. Give it a shape. And therefore, find meaning in it. And then I'm going to suggest, ask the question why this happened. So, finally, without a process of interpretation, you can't begin life again. And if you have had your own experience of great loss in your life, you may be familiar yourself with this inner human experience of being overwhelmed and pushed down and squashed in your life. And then little by little, as you gain distance from it, it is possible and hopeful that you will find a larger picture. The pain doesn't go away, but the picture expands. Your interpretation expands. So, okay, well, go to the next one, please, William, if you're there. Okay, we're going to walk through Genesis. May I ask you all, is this screen arrangement convenient for you? Is it comfortable with pictures on the side? Okay, so then you can sort of follow me. Anybody who, okay. So I'm now turning to Genesis 22, and I'm going to look at some of the language. And if you've got that, if you happen to have a Bible and have it open, fabulous. If you don't, here I go. Genesis 22 tells us right off the bat why we have this story. God is not punishing. You're not sinners. It's not your fault. It says, after these things, God tested Abraham. That interprets the whole story. God tested Abraham. Maybe you know people who later in life or sometime in their life begin to think about the fact that that was a terrible time, but it was a kind of test for me. And, I passed the test because I became resilient. I went on. God was with me. God was with me. So understanding catastrophe, trauma, and disaster as a test, from my theological point of view, is a survival strategy. It isn't, from my point of view, an insight into the basic identity of the divine. It is not an insight into a whole full-blown theology. For me, it isn't who God is. For me, taking it from, I hope, the point of view of this historical community, it's one way of taking steps out of the catastrophe and its overwhelming chaos into finding meaning and shape and form. So, okay, God's testing Abraham. Okay, but what a horrible, horrible test. So, it starts out with a formal call. I have no idea what time it is. I got to watch my time. God tests Abraham, and he calls Abraham. He calls him by name and formally, and Abraham answers. The English translation, here I am. The Hebrew, for those of you who are studying Hebrew for your pandemic experience, Hanani, here I am. Hebrew, that means like, behold, it's me. Behold, I'm ready. I'm ready. And you will see this repeated through the text. And then here comes this horrible command about which so much has been written. Take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love. Okay, we get that told. We get told three ways what kind of character Isaac is. He's your son. He's your only son. He's your beloved son. Okay, and go and offer him in sacrifice on Mount Moriah, a burnt offering. Burn him up. On a mountain that I'm going to show you. Now, we got to know this is the child of such importance. Let's just remember that this child has been promised since chapter 12. We're now 10 chapters later. They have so much trouble because they're ancient and it's impossible for them to have children, as we know. She is post-menopausal. He's 100 and some years old. And they can't possibly have a child, but they do. First miracle here. Now, 10 chapters later, this God who performs a miracle so the child will be born demands that the child be given back. Okay. So the next verses from 3 on are about the preparation. And a famous literary scholar named Erich Auerbach has written a fabulous article about this, comparing this story to the story of Odysseus. And he talks about the contrast of the way that Genesis tells the account. He says it's fraught with background. And what's in the background are all these psychological implications that are never brought to the surface, but left for the reader to imagine and fill in. In fact, one of my own fascinations with the whole book of Genesis is the way these stories do that. And I'll show you, I hope, when we get to Joseph in a few weeks from now. Anyway, so the preparation. And notice verse 4, on the third day, they're going to the mountain. This is preparation filled with dread, implied dread. It's never stated, but you put yourself in the shoes of Abraham, and he's going to the mountain to kill his beloved son. And there's a little conversation going on. He's going there to worship. He's got 2 guys, young fellows with him, there to wait. Then Abraham from them takes the wood and gives it to the child. So you're already, I hope, thinking about the story of Jesus' Passion, where he picks up his own cross, his own wood, the wood of the cross. Here, the father carries the knife and the fire, the means of execution. And the child says, in verse 7, Isaac says to his father, Abraham, Father, and here he is again, Hineni, here I am, it's me, I'm ready. And then the child says, well, how are we going to what are we going to offer for sacrifice? And the answer is, the Lord will provide. So for the reader, the Lord is providing the child. For the child, he doesn't know this. And the father's comment is open. It's not nailed down, but we read into it the sinister purposes of this thing. And look, awfulness. Okay, he says here, he's there again. And God will provide the lamb. Okay, Christian language. God will provide the lamb for the offering. It becomes Christian language. It is not Christian language. So then we get to the mountain. They come to the place. He builds an altar. He binds his son. Now, Ginger was wondering about the son. How can the son and the father have a relationship after this? That's a really good question. He bound his son and laid him on the altar, and Abraham, as Caravaggio had caught there, Abraham is ready to kill him with the knife in the air, and he gets the call again. And at this time, it's the angel of the Lord again, called to him from heaven, and this time calls his name twice, Abraham, Abraham. Listen to me, listen to me. And he said, Hineni, here I am. I'm ready. Whatever you want of me, because I am this most faithful father and disciple of God. And as a disciple of God, I am ready at every moment. But, okay, so he says, don't do it. So at the last minute, it couldn't be a more dramatic moment, especially in a world where they don't have movies and they don't have radio and they don't have films and they don't have Netflix. It couldn't be a more dramatic moment in the literature. For now, the test. Here's the test. I know that you fear God. And those of you who've studied the Old Testament know that language is not terror. It's language of honor, respect, subservience, willingness. There's a little fear there too. Now I know that you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. So Abraham sees a ram, they catch the ram, and then in verse 14, Abraham called the place the Lord will provide. Genesis is packed with stories of naming places. And from my point of view, they always identify the theme of the story. The Lord will provide. So far, what I'm suggesting about this text is that we know right off the bat it's a test. We know that Abraham is ready, honest, willing, obedient. He's faithful and trusting. He is going to obey this God. And he says, here I am, ready to do it. He believes God will provide, but we don't know what he means by that. And now he realizes God has provided. And then the text concludes from verse 15 and following with the renewal of the promise. And the promise is found in verse 17. Because you've done this, I will indeed bless you. I will make your offspring as numerous as the stars of the heaven and the sands of the sea. Now, that's where we started, way back in chapter 12 in the story of Abraham. We now get the promise of God reiterated after the near destruction of the child. So here's what I think is going on in this story. I think we have a reinterpretation of the catastrophe of the nation that's balanced on the edge of future together, no future together. Future as part of the Babylonian hegemony and the Persian world that takes over after that, or the future as the people of God, God's own people. Now, if I'm right about this text promises a future. And it promises the destroyed nation exactly what it needs. They need children. They need a future with children because there's been so much death, so much loss. They need babies. And that promise is given here. They need more things too. They need land because they don't own the land anymore. It's occupied by military invasion. So you might think more like of Afghanistan or something today. Pardon that political remark, but I keep doing that. Okay, so that's what I think here. Abraham returns, and as Ginger has pointed out, or I guess I pointed out to Ginger, there is no relationship between father and son going down the mountain. Poor Isaac. But if we don't think of it as the father and the son, if we think of it as the situation of the nation and its future, then we have here a theology of resilience. We have a sense. There's meaning here. God tested him. There's a future here. God will provide. What's that future? The future is, it wasn't the end of the nation, but indeed there are going to be children, more than you can count, more than you could ever hope for. So, now, William, if you're still there and alive and awake, would you go to the next? Okay. I'm just going to finish up and then let you, I hope, well, anyway, I'm going to try to finish up. This is a second painting by Caravaggio. Look at the same use of light. I love his chiaroscuro paintings. We start with the head of Abraham here, but notice there's a background here. There wasn't in another one. There's a kind of opening here. And then you've got the angel of the Lord, or who actually turns out to be the Lord, pointing at him and calling him, don't, stop. And then you follow the arm down to the light, and now you've got the child's terror on the child's face. Isn't it interesting to think, to me, it's interesting to think about what Caravaggio is doing, that he starts out with this kind of mild one, and then I think the order is he moves to this one. The horror is transparent, but there is light in the background. You can't see me pointing, but right there, can you see that? There's light up there. There's something opening here. Now, John, finally, or William, could I please go to the next one? Okay, these are two guys from Texas. I cannot find who they are. I found this a long time ago when I was teaching at Columbia, and I knew all about who they were. And then when I'm doing my commentary, I can't find the source, so I couldn't use it. Two guys from Texas. who act out classic pieces of art for contemporary the contemporary world. And this is their deliberate echo of the second of the Caravaggio paintings. And look at the way they do the same thing with the light. These two guys are the same age, but this is Abraham. Go down his arm, come to the knife, look at the face of the supposed child and the hand on the neck. And Abraham, now enacted in Texas, is looking over his shoulder because he's being interrupted. But in modern consciousness, there's no angel of the Lord or no God figure there. There is some interruption of this brother on brother horror. I think it's fantastic reinterpretation, but it doesn't do what I do. It doesn't see it unless you do what I do with the text, unless you see this as a story of the nation. You know, it becomes brother against brother in our culture. Two white guys on each other. Okay, now I have one more. Yeah. Oh, please, who are you? Ginger, good for you.
In the first picture, with the sun with the calm face.
Yes.
He is seeing the ram. So it's like, oh, I'm saved. I don't need to be afraid. But in the second painting, the ram is behind him.
Yes.
So he doesn't see that. So he has
sees nothing.
The real terror.
Yes, real terror. And then, of course, the interesting question that I'm not equipped to pursue, the interesting question is what's going on in Caravaggio's world that he sees his second painting as more, as a time of more terror. Has he experienced more terror himself? Is he becoming conscious of more terror? I don't know. Not my field, but I like to think about it. Molly, can we help you? Molly, you look like you're having trouble seeing. Molly, you're unmuted. You're unmuted. I mean, unmute.
I was looking for the lamb.
There's no lamb. That's exactly the point. There's no lamb. Yes. There's no angel. Thank you for signaling that.
So I also wondered if the red hat had any letters on it. Just kidding.
This is a long time ago, well before that awful, that horror, that terror, that collective trauma, pardon me. Okay, I'm not supposed to talk about politics, I suppose, but why not? It's so religious to talk about politics. Let's go to the next one. William, if you're still alive there at the other end. Thank you. You may all know this poem, the way this story gets retold yet again by Wilfred Owens, World War I poet, survivor of terrible battle that I don't remember, and who then goes back and then he writes this in between going back into the horror of that war. So he tells this story. So Abraham rose and clave the wood and went and took the fire with him and a knife. And as they sojourned, both of them together, Isaac, the firstborn, spake and said, My father, behold the preparations, fire and iron. But where the lamb for this burnt offering? Then Abram bound the youth with belts and straps and stretched forth the knife to slay his son, when lo, an angel called him out of heaven, saying, Lay not thy hand upon the lad, neither do anything to him, thy son. Behold, caught in a thicket by its rams, a ram. Offer the ram of pride. Notice this, the ram of pride instead. But the old man would not, but slew his son, and hath the seed of Europe one by one. Maybe you know that poem already, but it's a reflection, of course, on World War I and the horrible catastrophes that anybody in the war experienced. So this is Wilfred Owens, the pacifist. It's his take on his experience in the collective tragedy of World War I. And so I like this, of course, because what it says about war and the politics of war. But I also like it because of the way Wilfred Owens captured this sense of catastrophe and changes the ending to suit his reality. Okay, I'm going to take a deep breath now. I'm going to ask William to turn off the pictures, to turn off the PowerPoint. so I can see all of you and see what you want to say now.
Could I ask?
Who's talking? I can't see. Oh, yeah, William. Thank you.
Yes. Back in verse 5, what do you make of the use of the two first-person plurals as Abraham talks to the young men? He says, "We will worship, and then we will come back to you."
Lovely. Thank you.
Is that confidence? Is it lack of confidence that he can go through with it? Is it confidence that the Lord will provide? What's going on there, do you think?
Okay, now you have pointed to one of the psychological examples that draws us in. I think this can go any way at all. Is he lying in order to abate the terror of the child and the two young men who might interfere with him? If he probably wouldn't, they would be slaves or servants. Is that what he's doing, or is he confident? Is he sure God will provide something else, that this couldn't possibly happen? So this is part of the dread that gets built implicitly behind the scenes, and I'm delighted that you found it. You pointed it out.
Hi, this is Eric. One of the things that I'm reading a book about World War II, and specifically 5 of the directors that were involved with some of the propaganda films, etc. And I'm getting toward the end, and George Stevens was the last director there, and he was the one that went to Dachau. And it was said that after he went to Dachau and filmed, and he said it was as if he had to stand back. There was so much trauma there. He never did another comedy film after that. It traumatized him so much, even though he went back to Hollywood and directed films after that. And what you said about the trauma basically holds true with him. It was very interesting.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. I think it speaks for itself. Thank you, Pam.
Yeah, I don't have a question. I just think that's really a helpful interpretation. I had no idea and really never knew what to do with that story. And I think it makes such sense. I'm just deeply grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
A whole new way. Thank you.
Lib McGregor Simmons.
I'm very intrigued with your take on that the nation needs more babies.
Oh, yes.
And I remember, I think one of Rabbi Kushner's books, he says about the story that Isaac was not, he had developmental delays or whatever we might call it. I mean, he, in telling the story, and, that kind of makes a connection to me that perhaps, children, even in this, children who couldn't survive maybe were actually, kind of being left behind or something. It's just, my mind is just kind of going in this direction.
Yes.
And I'm also thinking, I don't know if you saw this, but there was a New York Times, may even be in today's paper, but posted a day or two ago op-ed piece by Frank Bruni.
Yes.
Who talks about that our nation needs more babies. Right?
Oh, yes. Yes. Yes.
So anyway, it's just very intriguing, and it's just making my mind kind of go in these kind of interesting directions.
Yes, well, we may need more babies, but does he mean we need more white babies? I want to ask that question, because there's a lot of babies down there on that border.
I know, that's precisely my question when I read the article.
It's just a question, and then we can go further and say, here. I want to talk more about the fact that all the characters are displaced people, because historically, much of the community is displaced. They've either been dragged over and their children, this is probably their children. Their children are living in Babylon, liking Babylon. There's really good worship there, pretty glorious wealth, and they start to assimilate and do pretty well. And then there's the people back in the land, the occupied land. If you want to read about what that's like, read chapter 5 of Lamentations, and you'll see, the forced labor that's implied, rape, all awful things happening. And these people are, in my interpretation, equally traumatized. So the book of Genesis is concerned, from my point of view, about the displacement of everybody. And of course, to me, this becomes a resource for us reflecting on our current problem, the global problem of migration and wealth disparity. But I'm not an expert there, so I'll just raise it. But then I want to go on and observe that part of my theory is that Isaac himself represents the people of the land, because there's a few chapters about him where, for crazy reasons, he is not allowed to leave the land. He needs a wife. Abraham is getting him a wife. We don't know that they're friends now, but we know he's getting him a wife. And he has to send a servant to get a wife from their relatives up in Padam Aram or somewhere like that, I forget where, and he can't leave. And there's Isaac hardly matters, but that's crazy story. Why not? And I've decided he's representing the people of the land who don't ever get to leave, but that the majority of the book is from the point of view of the exiled, educated, priestly class. I'm going to say that would be you, that you're the ones that are deported, you're the educated, you have resources, there you are, and you're the ones who are going to come back and kind of take over. But there's a clash in Genesis between Isaac's family, the people of the land, and the people who are exiled. And I hope we'll get to that in 2 weeks' time, not Easter Sunday, but the Sunday after, when we go into the story of Joseph, where you've got both branches of the family. Joseph is the exile, enslaved in Egypt. He's exiled, not in Babylon, in Egypt. Story told indirectly in my reading. And Isaac represents the people who stay in the land who also are blessed. But then comes Jacob and his other sons who stay in the land, and they all meet up in Egypt. So it's as if the two parts of the broken society meet there. But by the time we get to the Joseph story, the new huge issue is the cooperation among the fight between the people of the land and the people who are exiled. So there's conflict in the family now about to destroy the nation and their future. And that's what I think the Joseph story is, at least in part, about, as it tells the story of the exiles, those who are deported and lose everything. Well, no more. I'll wait till we get there if we do. Okay, what else? Anything else?
I'm fascinated by the concept. My question is, how well do you get along with the literal readers of the Bible?
I don't get along with them. And you can imagine, and nor do other critical scholars, even if they don't go in my direction. There's a huge divide there, and I love the question, and I haven't a clue about how to deal with it. Beyond being in the classroom lovingly for a very long time and trying, not always succeeding, to help people see with a different lens. But the question arises out of the problem of modernism and and maybe education, maybe liberal education, humanist education about how literature functions. You know, if one only reads literature and the sacred literature of our scriptures, if you only read it as an historical account of what really happened, you're really reducing the literature. You're violating the literature. You don't allow the multiple nuances that questions you've already asked suggest, like the question, why does it say we will return after we worship? Why does it say that? You would have to literally think he completely is sure it's going to work out. But we're not sure of that if we look at the larger picture here. So if you get an answer for that, I would be really grateful to receive your insight, because it's the issue, of course, in our current America, with those who are literalist readers and those who are not, or those who don't even care about the Bible, but really the literalist readers.
Scholars think that this was written.
Well, we don't know when it was written.
But when did they,
we located in the post-Babylonian period under the Persian, when the Persians destroyed the Babylonians, probably the 4th century, 3rd century BC. So invasions happen in the 500s. We would locate this typically in the 400s. Now, there are still people who want to put it back in the 1200s or the 800s. But I'm going to say parts of it come from there. I join those who believe in source criticism. If you've heard of that, I suspect that our first 5 books of the Bible, you want to hear this? The first 5 books of the Bible are a compilation of many different written sources from different periods of time. And critical scholars will agree that this gets put together as the work, the first 5 books, the Pentateuch, get put together under the auspices of the priests. Maybe most of them have been deported, and it's their children that come back and put it together. And one of the arguments about this is that the stuff gets written down, the stories get pulled together from separate pieces, literary, historical, written sources that people have, the priests have, and oral traditions that get compiled here. So what I do is accept that as a basic understanding of these books, but then I see particular rhetorical purposes in the hands of the editors of this book, the priestly editors. And I don't think this is just literature to tell you what happened. I think it's literature to persuade you about beginning again. It's stories of beginnings to help the community begin again. And so it's a book of creation for the sake of recreation. It's about new life emerging out of what could have been the chaotic end, the destruction of the people of God. And I'm not alone in thinking that. If you want to read a really well-written study, it's not even, it's more, well, I'm trying to think of a source. David Carr has written a book called, I think it's called Holy Resilience. And the subtitle is The Traumatic Traces of Trauma in the Bible. Or if you look up David Carr, if you're interested, you'll find it. I don't have the title at my fingertips, being quite elderly at this point. So I think he starts with Genesis. He didn't have my book yet, so he doesn't quite do it the way I do it, but he sees traumatic traces all the way through the New Testament. And if you want, one example of that, you think about the passion and death of Jesus. How did those stories come to be? Because it was over. It was over. It was death. And it wasn't just ordinary death. It was smash down, destroy everything death for that community of the followers of Jesus. But it's not the end. It's the beginning. So he takes the approach I take, and he shows you that developing from Genesis all the way to the end of the Bible. So, and it's so well written. I mean, it's really engagingly written. Somebody wrote something in the chat. I don't know what that, I never pay attention to that. I shall look. Oh, someone looked it up. Who looked it up? Thank you. Jesse Jones, where are you? Thank you. Holy Resilience, Traumatic Origins. Okay, David. Anyway, Holy Resilience. Thank you. Jesse.
Glad to help. Looks good.
What else? Okay, I'm very proud of myself because I was able to keep quiet a tiny bit. And I'm not always able to do that.
I was curious about, you talked about this as being a test. And when we go through sorrow, when we go through accidents and fire, how do you determine whether that's a test or not? I can imagine situations where it's just a pure tragedy. There's no test involved.
Well, thank you, Dennis. That's exactly my thought. I don't think this is good theology at all. I think it's terrible theology. But as a stepping stone toward a larger vision, I consider it a survival strategy. Mm-hmm. Similarly, I think that about God as a punishing deity. And if you look, I started thinking about this. If you look at the prophet Jeremiah with its horrible fire and brimstone, the people are called whores because they go after other gods. God is punishing them for their whoredom all the way through the poetry of this book. What I think about that is that it's a way to grasp for meaning. Blame yourself, blame God. But as a full theology about who God is, I mean, I don't think we have a punishing God. I don't think we have a testing God. I think we have a loving, present holiness among us. And that these are just ways to cling, to hold on until we can go further. But let me say that I think the churches get stuck exactly at that point of the punishing God. And that becomes who God is. And instead of telling it as a way humans experience their catastrophes and cataclysms and try to find meaning and keep God in the picture. It's what's his name? Our poet Robert Frost says this about poetry. Poetry is a temporary stay against confusion. I want to say that about the testing God. I want to say that about the punishing God. I want to say that about our fault, bringing it on. Now, sure, we have some responsibility. I have one more minute. But like if you take Jeremiah's responding to the invasions by Babylon practically as they're happening. They're right after that. It's like the first responder, the first theological responder. And he's trying to find a way to keep alive the God who has made them who they are. And you just get stuck there. And he doesn't get stuck there. Later in the book, we have the language of New Covenant. We have beautiful, comforting language. The poetry of Jeremiah moves on. And then, I like to say to our students regarding pastoral care, if you're caring for somebody who's just lost a child or who's lost anything, and they start doing that, I don't think it's a good idea to talk them out of it too fast. But you don't want them stuck there.
I agree.
Hold you together for a little while. But then, you either have a horrible relationship with the Holy One, or, you squelch yourself terribly if you get stuck there. The Catholic Church, of which I am a member still, has done that for the whole Middle Ages. You all did too. When you you all had a theology of a God who punishes for sin, and it's not that we don't deserve punishment, but if you think of Jeremiah, what caused the Babylonian invasions? An aggrandizing empire, failure of kings, people who outside their complete control have brought the nation down, and yet they blame themselves. We're whores. Oh, isn't this fun?
Thank you.
I think, am I supposed to stop us, or does it just happen that it ends?
I can stop it.
Okay, well, I want to say thank you so much. I hope you have a beautiful Holy Week, that Palm Sunday brings you into our common journey toward the resurrection. And if you're able to be with us next time, I identified for John Ryan, your pastor, the chapters that I'm using from the Joseph story. The most eager would love to read. Will all of you read 37 to 45? But we can't talk about all of that. So I'll continue talking about trauma theory and disaster theory in relation to the Joseph story. And if you do that, if you're with us, you may have a lens now for going into it. Anything else?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Oh,
you.
it's a blast. Thank you. I love being with you.
Really appreciate it.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
See you soon.